Today, we're talking about the most recent roster moves and injury updates around the Washington Commanders. We're also going to be talking about the adjustments that the Commanders are looking to make to turn this season around. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that like, hit that subscribe, and follow the channel as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football daily. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with the most recent roster moves with the Washington Commanders. Then we're going to talk about the most recent injury updates. And so starting with the most recent roster moves, the Washington Commanders go ahead and sign Treylon Burks to the active roster along with Sheldon Day. So both of those players are on the active roster. And so starting with Treylon Burks, look, I'm not surprised that he's on the active roster, especially with the wide receiver situation right now with this team. You don't have Luke McCaffrey. You don't have Noah Brown. Right now, Terry McLaurin is not practicing. And so this team needs somebody to step up at the wide receiver position. This player is an experienced player. And look, I know he hasn't done a whole bunch as far as productivity with the Tennessee Titans, but perhaps, with this team, he can go ahead and maybe get something going here because this team will need somebody to challenge defenses. And so Treylon Burks, he's on the active roster. And then with Sheldon Day, not surprised with this move as well, especially with what has happened at the defensive end. And then also, too, some players have been a little banged up on that defensive line. And so Sheldon Day, I knew he was going to get some snaps just like Treylon Burks was going to get some snaps last week. And so I would expect for both of these players to continue to see a lot of action down the stretch for the Washington Commanders. And so next, talking about some players that they just signed here. And so it looks like that the Commanders went out and signed Hawkins and Daryl Worley. And so Hawkins, a cornerback, and Daryl Worley, a safety, they are both going to be signed to the practice squad. So not surprised with this situation, especially, with what happened with Marshawn Lattimore, and just really the cornerback position is a little banged up right now with Trey Amos as well. He's a little banged up, which we're going to talk about that in a moment. But, not to shift too far ahead, but starting with Hawkins. And so with Hawkins, this is a player that he's been in the league for 2 years. He played with the New York Giants. He has 1 interception. Most tackles that he's had in the season is 35. And I just think that the bottom line here is that with the Commanders banged up in the secondary, there is a chance that you might see Hawkins out there this season. And then, with Daryl Worley, this is a player that played for the Tennessee Titans last season. I think that he was pretty good for them as far as coming up and making some stops, especially as far as being a good tackler. So he had 52 total tackles there and an INT and 1 forced fumble. And so a player that certainly could get some looks here with the Washington Commanders, again, with that banged up secondary. And so, next, I kind of wanted to go ahead and jump into just the injury updates around the team. And so this is the most recent injury report that I saw here on commanders.com if you want to go ahead and check it out there. And so starting with the top, we know that Jaden Daniels is going to be out. And so we'll find out some more about him, I'm sure. Hopefully tomorrow we get an update as far as what the plan is going to be for Jaden Daniels. And then this is where it starts to get interesting. And so you see that Quan Martin, hamstring, did not practice Wednesday and was limited Thursday. And so, again, the Commanders have been banged up really throughout the season. It's not necessarily the greatest sign here that he's dealing with a hamstring. And so let's see what happens with Quan Martin if he's able to be a full go. Terry McLaurin pretty much knew that he was going to be out this week. And so you see that he gets the DNP for did not practice. Another kind of interesting situation here. You got Tyler Owens, a hamstring / neck, did not practice, and he was limited Thursday. And so we'll see what happens with that situation. Laramie Tunsil had been dealing with that hamstring since Kansas City. Good sign that he did get a chance to get a full practice on Thursday. The next with Trey Amos. And so just going back to what I was talking about earlier, you see that he was limited. And so you did see that he was kind of hobbling a little bit in that last game against the Seahawks. And so limited with that hip. Let's see if he can go. Then you have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. He was dealing with a tooth issue, but he was able to practice today. And then this is what I was talking about in regards to Sheldon Day. And so you see that Eddie Goldman was dealing with a concussion. He was limited initially, but he was a full participant here. And then Johnny Newton has been dealing with that ankle, but a good sign that both of these players were full today. And some more good news is that Colson Yankoff was able to at least get some limited practices in. And so he's been out due to that hamstring. And then Bobby Wagner's been on the injury report for a couple times now with that thumb injury. And so he ends up playing. And so that's the most recent injury update here around the Washington Commanders as they get ready to head into this late game against the Detroit Lions on Sunday. And so now I wanted to talk about just some of the adjustments that the Washington Commanders are looking to make. And so this comes via Joe Whitt Jr. and then also to Kliff Kingsbury as they talked in their presser. And so, just paraphrasing this, if you want to go check out the entire presser, you can head over to commanders.com or their YouTube channel, and you can check out the entire pressers there. And so starting with Joe Whitt Jr. and really what he was talking about, the first thing he says is he's talking about his move down to the field. So talking about like kind of bringing more energy, to the unit that way from the field, and just talking about really, how you have the advantage when you're looking over top of the field or whatnot. You can see different things and stuff like that, but still, he's going to go ahead and make that adjustment. He wanted to. He feels like that is the right thing to do. And really at this point in time, he just feels like that the defense is just not really, playing to the standard that they want. And they're going to do everything that they can do to get a win. And you just have to try something different. And so, speaking of adjustments, he talked about, just making the adjustments to the walkthrough and the meeting structures and like the voiceovers and things like that they're sending to the team. And so let's see if this team can just really, get these adjustments and get them rolling here in this back half of the season, because the Commanders are certainly going to have to do something. So I'm right there with them. But yes, I mean, it's not just the defense, but a lot of it, I think a lot of people are looking at the defense, but it's the entire football team just really has to do something different. And so, let's see if the Commanders are able to just really kind of stop a lot of the stuff that they've been giving up, because one of the things that is mentioned in the presser that has been frustrating to Joe Whitt Jr. is just really giving up the amount of big plays in the passing game. He says that has been extremely frustrating. He did say that Jordan McGee, has really, been impressive with his speed, the way that he's clawing at the ball, and his hitting ability as well. And so he's hoping to put together some more packages to get him out there. And so, let's see if these little adjustments, again, just give this team a bit of a spark, because the injuries have certainly hit this side of the ball. He mentions the 3 defensive ends that have been out: Will Harris, Marshawn Lattimore. I just went over the injury report. You have Quan Martin. It looks like that he might be a little banged up going into this one, and Tyler Owens. And so this team will have to overcome some things, but these are some of the adjustments that you can be looking to see for this upcoming game against the Detroit Lions. And so next, talking about some adjustments and just really maximizing opportunities. And so this comes from Kliff Kingsbury in his presser today. And I think that the bottom line in what he's talking about is just really the team has to stop pressing and just really take what it's given. And so he talked about, an example with Chris Rodriguez Jr. and just how he did a great job as far as coming in and just really taking what was blocked and just really kind of maximizing those situations where he had chances, to really run the football and things like that. But he's talking about really too, just the entire offense has got to be able to do that. And so when you're talking about like maximizing not only the personnel, but also too, he mentions like finishing drives, which is what you want to do when you have the possession. You want to maximize these possessions, and also too, not turning it over and the penalties and things like that. Like you have to be able to maximize those opportunities. And so one of the things that he said with this team as far as making adjustments in that department is just really looking to practice these things as if it is a game situation to kind of clean this stuff up. And so that is something that the Commanders are looking to do. He does acknowledge the fact that it has been tough, with players that have been in and out and just trying to get on the same page. He talks about time on task is huge. And so we know that, and that's something that really has been talked about with this team, is just really with these injuries and just players being out, it is hard to get on the same page here. And so the Commanders have just got to find a way to play some consistent football, not beat themselves, and hopefully we can see some players that just really can step up. And so let's see if Marcus Mariota can go ahead and just keep this team together while Jaden Daniels is out. And, just assuming that Jaden Daniels is possibly going to come back if this team is in position, to make a run at the playoffs. And then also, too, players like Jalen Lane or, a Chris Rodriguez, these guys are going to have to step up, but you have to give them the opportunity as well. And so that has to be a part of the changes out there. You got to give these players some more opportunities. And so let's see what happens with the Washington Commanders. You guys let me know if these adjustments and if these maximized opportunities are going to show against the Detroit Lions. Also, too, let me know what you guys are thinking here with some of these roster moves. Again, I think that Treylon Burks and then also, too, Sheldon Day certainly are going to see some significant snaps. And I also think that it is a real possibility that, some of these practice squad players are going to get some reps, too, especially with the secondary being banged up. And so I could see some of these players being thrown out there. And so let's see what happens with that. And so as we always say, look, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.